So we'll be moving right along to More Than Meets the Eye, Issue 3, written by James Roberts, with art by Alex Milne, colors by Josh Burcham, letters by Sean Lee, and edits by John Barber. And this opens up with like a brief flashback to try to answer the question that was left at the end of Issue 2 as to the dead Autobot that was found on the floor by Red Alert. So we get a few moments before that where Shock, the other half of the Duobots, Shock and Orr, is grieving his other half, or who died when the ship took off in the engine block in the first issue. The Duobots, I believe, are an IDW invention, and they're supposed to be kind of like the Autobot answer to the Duocons, which I thought was cool. And now Shock is expressing his disappointment in being the only half of a Duobot set. He refers to himself as a walking misnomer, the world's only Duobot. But he begins to unveil a bit of the mystery, removing a communicator from Orr's hand and deleting the last call, which was made to Prowl, while looking for a tracer that they were intended to attach to the engines, presumably so Prowl could keep track of the lost light. But while trying to fulfill the mission, the room is broken into by what we believe to be a Spark Eater, and solves at least the one problem that Shock had of being the world's only Duobot by eliminating him and leaving his dead body on the floor, which Red Alert then sent word of to Rodimus, who only responds with cool, which is crazy. But I think it speaks to the sense of adventure that Rodimus is sort of looking for. Rodimus then organizes a search party to try to track down the Spark Eater and takes along Ratchet, Trailbreaker, and Chrome Dome. But then goes on to say, if anyone here does happen to carry industrial strength energy dampeners or turn into a nullification booth or is able to generate level 9 containment fields, then feel free to tag along. The rest of the bots, he advises to go off to a habitation suite, but then tells Ultra Magnus, give them 5 minutes to find a hab suite, then lock them in. To which Magnus says, lock them in? You think they disobey orders? And Rodimus says, I would if I was them. Rewind decides to tag along with Chrome Dome, and we get our first introduction to the relationship between Tailgate and Cyclonus, who Tailgate says, finally, someone I recognize. So the search team first goes to Shock's dead body, where they're debating the validity of an actual Spark Eater. They seem to be kind of the stuff of legend. Magnus says, I once arrested a Decepticon who thought he was a Spark Eater. He called himself the Dark Assassin, the Devourer of Souls, and Propagator of Infinite Sin. His real name was Blip. Rewind claims to have some actual footage of one, and Ratchet has a more kind of practical, evidence-based, pragmatic approach. And then there's a funny bit where Rewind says, Orr, I think his name is Orr, but this is Shock, and no one could really tell them apart because they were always together as Duobots, and they just sort of referred to them as the red one and the blue one. After Ratchet's investigation, he agrees that it's a Spark Eater, but Rodimus wants a second opinion, so he calls in Chrome Dome, who Rewind tells Trailbreaker is a neuroscientist who specializes in memory. He knows the brain so intimately, he's able to read memories and other stuff too, stuff we don't talk about. But apparently what makes this tricky is because he's dead, he may only be able to access the last few moments. He says, see, after they die, the details get a little sketchy. Meanwhile, we get a little look at what's going on with the other Autobots. Cyclonus did pick up Tailgate and take him to the habitation suite, or at least one. And Cyclonus and Tailgate take a minute to catch up. They both acknowledge that they've missed the past 6 million years, but Cyclonus is a bit more aware of what's going on, and he sort of brings Tailgate up to speed. He says, you missed a war between the Autobots and Decepticons. Tailgate asks who won, and Cyclonus says it depends on who you ask. As I understand it, both sides wanted change. They just disagreed over the nature, scale, and purpose. One side rose up against a corrupt Senate and sought to emancipate the people. The other side, while superficially opposed to the ruling elite, were terrified of revolution. They wanted an ordinary transition from one system of government to another, provided they remain in control, of course. One side swept across the planet, liberating province after province. The inhabitants were expected to help their liberators overthrow the old order. The other side saw this as an act of coercion and vowed to kill the uprising. The Senate fell, but the war continued. And he goes on to ponder, I wonder which side you would have been on had you been here, to Tailgate. And Swerve stumbles upon an abandoned bar, which he expresses was kind of like always been his dream to have his own bar, which becomes sort of an iconic thing for him later on. We also learn a little bit about Skids. He starts immediately trying to escape, mind you. But he says that he has missing components of his memory that he's trying to get answers to. He basically tells Swerve this because Swerve advises him not to break the rules and try to escape, and he says he can kind of always blame it on these memory gaps, that his head isn't quite right, but it gives us a little insight as to what's going on with him. Chrome Dome comes out of his process and basically confirms that he thinks it's a Spark Eater. He calls it a freaky, mad-eyed psychopath who floats above the ground with half his head missing and dead souls in his guts, which they all agree sounds like a pretty bad thing. So their goal is to contain it because they're considering that the sparks may be intact in its gut, so they might be able to preserve these dead Autobot sparks. So they decide to split up and search the other decks, while Rodimus stays there because he thinks it'll come back, because Ratchet said it would go after the brightest, and then he sort of trails off because Rodimus is quite full of himself in these books. We cut back to the upper decks and find a bot named Animus trying to get in contact with Whirl, but Whirl keeps him locked out of his room, where he's eventually caught by the Spark Eater, who makes short work of him. Whirl, kind of getting the gist of what's going on, decides to take it on and unleashes what looks like 2 missiles at it, which of course we know we're trying to prevent to preserve the sparks. And also, if the sparks are damaged, it can cause a massive explosion. So Trailbreaker happens to step in at the right time, creating a force field to stop the missiles from hitting the Spark Eater, which allows the opportunity for the Spark Eater to get away. So once again, they're on the hunt, and Magnus acknowledges that they're not the only ones and that the Spark Eater is hunting for the brightest spark. Red Alert mentions it was headed west towards the munition stores, but there's only one actual room down there, which is occupied by Rung. And that's who the Spark Eater seems to be after. But luckily, in the midst of being attacked, he's saved by Skids, who has been searching through the ceiling panels since his initial escape. While Skids and Rung try to make an escape, they are being followed by the Spark Eater, and quite rapidly. Rung is contacted by Rodimus, who basically advises Rung to get down to the engine rooms so that they can lead the Spark Eater to them and they can get rid of it, essentially using them as bait. While escaping, they come in contact with Brainstorm, who they ask to take them to the engine rooms, but are rapidly interrupted by the Spark Eater, who rips the room to shreds. Skids and Rung make a narrow escape out of the room, but trap Brainstorm in the room with the Spark Eater. Brainstorm raises his iconic briefcase to sort of shield him from what he expects to be imminent death, only to find the Spark Eater left him alone. So Rung and Skids do make their way to Rodimus, who literally holds Rung up by his forearms and says to the Spark Eater, "Hurry up, ugly, your dinner's getting cold feet." The Spark Eater makes a charge for them. Rodimus throws Rung to the side, grabs a hold of the Spark Eater, and yells to Perceptor now, who initiates the quantum jump, sending the Lost Light deeper into space, but catching the Spark Eater in the engine block in the same way that had been done to Ore. First rule of interstellar travel: never stand next to a quantum generator when it's about to flout the laws of nature. But because Rodimus was holding on to him, he lost his forearms as well, which Ratchet had to build from scratch. Ultra Magnus says, "What you did back there was completely unacceptable. If you want to put your own life at risk, go ahead, but using Rung like that." And Rodimus says, "Are you lecturing me?" To which Magnus responds, "No, this is me telling you something that no one else will, certainly not Drift." He looks at you in awe as if you're some kind of, I don't know. And Rodimus says, "Remember who you're talking to. While you're on this ship, you answer to me, not the other way around. Are we clear on that?" Which helps to establish some of the more trickier dynamics between these two characters for the rest of the books. And this issue closes with Ratchet reconnecting Tailgate to his lower body. Tailgate says to him, "I know the war's over and everything, but I've been hearing about what happened, about how people took sides and how even now, even when it shouldn't, your allegiance matters." Ratchet says, and Tailgate says, "And I've made a decision. I want to be a Decepticon." And that's how the book closes, bringing closure to the first arc of the More Than Meets the Eye story, with overcoming the challenge of the Spark Eater, introducing a lot of the characters, and introducing a lot of the dynamics between those characters, between Rodimus and Drift, Rodimus and Ultra Magnus, the history between Tailgate and Cyclonus, establishing Whirl and Swerve as characters, and some of the mystery associated with both Brainstorm's briefcase and Skid's past. And when we reconvene, we'll be starting with Robots in Disguise, Issue 1. See you next time. Hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.